Tanzanian co-joined twins Maria and Consolata Makikuti have begun special computer classes at the Ruhr Catholic University ahead of academic term resumption next month. According to media report, they arrived earlier than other students in order to settle in and make sure the facilities are adapted to their needs. The twins completed their secondary education in May this year and are hoping to becoming teachers. Well, still in Uganda, going to Uganda right now, members of parliament who are backing the lifting of the presidential age limit say they will not be intimidated by their opponents to the change. The MPs from the governing National Resistance Movement appeared on the grounds of parliament wearing T-shirts with 75 plus written on the back. The T-shirts were made by the Kick Age Limit out of the Constitution Youth Group, which is mobilizing for the cause. Earlier this week, the MPs agreed to support a motion to begin the process of changing the rules, although it is not clear when that will happen. If the motion is successful, this will be the second major change to Uganda's 20-year-old constitution to directly favour Mr. Museveni's continued stay in power. And to South Africa, police in the KwaZulu-Natal province say they have arrested 6 people alleged to have been involved in a spate of politically motivated murders. Officials say they seized firearms and ammunition in an operation that will help them in further investigations of the killings. At least 35 people have been killed in the region since last year. Sadisco Magakwa, a high-profile ANC figure who was once Secretary General of the influential ANC Youth League, was among the latest victims. KwaZulu-Natal was a troubled past with thousands dying in political violence in the 1980s and 1990s. And at least 5 worshippers have been killed in a mosque in northern Cameroon after a female suicide bomb exploded bearing the hallmarks of Islamist militant Boko Haram. The governor of Cameroon's far north region says the 13-year-old arrived at the Sanda Wajiri Mosque in remote Kolo Fata at the first call to prayer between the hours of 5 and 6 a.m. It did not name any suspects, but Boko Haram has repeatedly used suicide bombers as well as strapping children with explosives to strike at civilian and military targets. Amnesty International last week said that Boko Haram had killed 381 civilians in Nigeria and Cameroon since the beginning of April, more than double that for the preceding 5 months. And the Libyan authorities have repatriated around 170 voluntary legal Sudanese migrants. Some of them are those who attempted journeys to Europe but were intercepted by Libya's Coast Guard, or those whose boats capsized in the Mediterranean but were rescued and sent to detention centres across the country. Many of these centres have become overparked and no longer have the necessary space to accommodate the large influx of illegal migrants, especially during the warm summer months. The International Organization for Migration, IOM, says these migrants were given the option of going back home and twice a week organizes travel documents and private planes to various destinations in Africa. The voluntary return program takes weeks of communications with the embassies of these migrants, mostly from sub-Saharan and West Africa, to facilitate their return. In an effort to raise the global profile of the Lake Chad Basin crisis, the United Nations humanitarian chief Mark Lowcock visits the Ngagam displacement camps in Niger. The UN aid chief calls for more international support for the nearly 17 million people displaced, affected by the violence.
Humanitarian chief Mark Lowcock visits displaced civilians in Niger's Ngagam displacement site. This is an effort to raise the global profile of the Lake Chad Basin crisis. According to the UN, more than 400,000 people in Niger's Diffa region, or 1 out of 2 people, require humanitarian assistance as Boko Haram attacks remain a grave threat. Situated near the border with Nigeria, Ngagam had a pre-crisis population of 1,000, but now hosts 13,500 people from both Niger and Nigeria whose homes were destroyed or villages are considered too dangerous to return to. Most of the 250,000 displaced people in Diffa live in informal settlements alongside vulnerable communities which are also feeling the strain of this large influx.
I wanted to come here and meet the people who've fled from their homes to the camps here and hear their story. And what the people told me is that the humanitarian assistance provided by all the agencies, the UN agencies, the NGOs behind the government, and supported and coordinated by us in OCHA, is making a difference.
The humanitarian situation in the region is said to be affecting about 17 million people. Niger's southeast has faced an unprecedented security crisis and humanitarian emergency since the first wave of Boko Haram attacks in 2015. 2 years of insecurity and recurrent attacks have uprooted hundreds of thousands of civilians, often forced to flee multiple times, and overstretched limited basic services and resources.
That what they really want is to go home. And in order for that to happen, there needs to be security and they need a chance to build new lives.
Boko Haram has killed over 20,000 people and displaced more than 2 million during an 8-year insurgency aimed at creating an Islamic State in Nigeria. A regional force that includes troops from Niger has retaken much of its territory in the last 2 years. The conflict has forced millions to flee their homes across Cameroon, Chad, Niger and Nigeria.